Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm ready. I'm listening now.
Thank you so much for taking my call, and I'm so sorry that we're talking, at 5:10 and you should be going home already. So thank you. I'm going to try to be as brief as possible. Um, I already provided to Adult Protective Services, now Jasmine Smith, evidence to show that that Mrs. Povinetti, who's an 82-year-old woman, has overpaid the landlord. Now, in a 2-year period, and everybody agrees to this, she paid about over $14,000, and she was only obligated to pay about $10,600. Now, Jasmine Smith asked me for evidence. Everybody's already gotten this, but I already sent it to her and to everybody in sight today. There are 2 canceled checks. Those canceled checks plus a big credit that I got for this lady add up to like $14,200. She's only supposed to pay her SCREE amount. This is the amount after the senior citizens discount. So her legally regulated rent is $696. Minus the $253 for her senior citizens SCREE discount, she should only be paying $443. So if you take $443 and you multiply by 12, and you multiply, that's about $5,300 a year. Over the last 2 years, she should only pay about $10,600, but she has overpaid about $4,000. Now, when we went to the district attorney's office, he asked me, Lydia, how can you show that by March 1st, 2010, that this lady didn't owe the landlord any money? And I'm like, look, it's very simple, and you have that scanned document on your email. There was a rent demand in January and February of 2010 for about $1,300, and there's a rent receipt for February 18th, 2010 for the amount of money that she paid in full. And I'm doing this from my memory, so it's about, oh yeah, here it is. It's check number 135, and it's $1,344.72. So she paid that invoice in full for January and February of 2010. By February 18th, 2010, that means she had a zero balance going into March 1st, 2010, and she started afresh. So if you look at the amount of money she paid from March 1st, 2010 to March 1st, 2012, that 2-year period, she gave this landlord a big check for $5,000. She gave him another big check for about $1,700. She got a big credit for overpaying of about $7,500. That's about $14,200. Nobody disputes this. Everybody agrees to it. In that same 2-year period, she should not have been paying $696 a month. She should have been paying $443 a month. So if $443 a month is about $5,300 a year times 2 years is about $10,600. She's been overpaying. And one of the questions that I was asked by a police detective was, can you show that this overpayment was willful? And I'm like, yes. He's like, can you show me rent demands that the landlord made for $443? Yes. Can you show me rent demands that the landlord made for the higher amount, the legal regulated rent, for $996? Yes. In fact, I called the landlord. I made heroic good faith efforts, starting from his bookkeeper, his son, and finally to the landlord. And I have tape recorded conversations with this guy, and I'm like, look, Mr. Polinsky, I'm not trying to give you a hard time here. I'm just trying to get an accurate bill. And if you can write nasty editorial comments on the bill, why can't you just write minus 253 equals 443, circle that, and say pay this, and I get nasty responses.
I ask you one question.
Sure.
What's your interest in the case? I didn't find that out before.
I have no interest in this case other than I'm a friend of Mrs. Povinetti's. I have my own rent-stabilized apartment in Washington Heights.
So you're just advocating on her behalf.
Well, her daughter is a friend of mine. Her daughter helped me. I didn't know how to say thank you to her daughter, so I talked to her family. I keep her church and her family informed, and I said, I'll help your family as a way of saying thank you. And that's how I got embroiled in this, which I thought would be easy to solve because I didn't think the landlord was going to be this much of a monster. But I've been falsely accused of trying to steal this apartment. Let me tell you, I do not want to live in Brooklyn. I have a rent-stable apartment in Washington Heights. I want to live in Washington Heights. My friends are in Washington Heights. My apartment, my rent-stabilized apartment, is in Washington Heights. I'm fighting with my landlord over issues. And so I'm litigating to try to get my apartment back. The judge in my case lied, fabricated, wholesale made up a ruling that it was okay for my roommate to illegally change the locks without a court order. I had to get a pro bono attorney from a large nonprofit group to appeal that case. I thought the case would be more moving faster along than it is. That's okay. The attorney's doing the best he can, and I'm engaging another attorney to try to help him. So I have no interest in this apartment. All right. So, when I talk to the landlord, he threatens me. He defamed this little old lady by saying that she refused to pay the rent. Oh, no, she couldn't pay the rent when she was in the Locke psychiatric ward. He's running around telling people she's crazy. I'm like, this little old lady has never been in the Locke psychiatric ward.
Okay. All right.
So what's happening now is your agency wants to declare Mrs. Povan. Your agency was originally sicked on us in like November of last year when I stood up to Natasha Phillips. Natasha Phillips is the landlord's bookkeeper. She made the first complaint. Now, she provided to me a false rent ledger, and I confronted her on it, and I said, this is fraud. Then I had to go to the landlord's brother, David. He also didn't provide me with accurate information. Then I had to go to the landlord. So, when Adult Protective Services was sicked on us, you guys sent a psychiatrist down. The psychiatrist found Mrs. Povanetti competent. Now, if the landlord, so now what they want to do is have Mrs. Povanetti declared incompetent so you can take her case, and then have
Who can take her case?
Adult Protective Services.
Okay. So, all right. Let me interject here now.
Miss Anderson, if the landlord refunds her money to her or even gives it as a credit towards rent, she can hire the assistance that she needs with her church in the neighborhood. She doesn't need big government spending. She needs a little assistance, and there are people here who are willing to help her, and there's a number of little part-time jobs that people can do for her. But she's overpaid the landlord by $4,000, and because, here's why no one wants to do anything, because I can show that this overpayment was willful, that the landlord knew what he was doing, he's facing criminal charges and triple damages. So nobody wants to advocate for this lady. Instead, she's got a court-appointed guardian named Michael Valentine. You would not believe this guy. He is unbelievable. I have to fight back with this guy. He refused to tell us his name. He won't give me his email address. He with the landlord's attorney, refuses to give the judge evidence.
Okay, since it's after 5 and
Okay.
it's running a little, let me tell you this.
Okay.
APS, you said earlier that the psychiatrist declared her competent.
Correct.
If the psychiatrist, I haven't looked at the case, I don't know anything about the case more than what you're telling me, so I'll have to pull the record and check it for myself. But if the psychiatrist did declare her competent, that is not within our criteria, because our criteria to accept the case says you must be 18 years or older, mentally and or physically impaired, with no one willing and responsible enough to advocate for you, which puts you at risk.
Well,
that's the criteria for Adult Protective Services. And if our psychiatrist went out and said she was competent mentally, then her case should really be closed based on state laws, because for us to go in and do anything, we are really infringing on our constitutional right, because the state governs Adult Protective Services, and they say if you're mentally competent and you have people advocating for you, are willing and able to do that, and you're competent, then you're not eligible for APS services. So there's an issue here. So what I can do, since it's after 5, tomorrow, from here, I'll pull the case to review it, and I will look at the facts, and then I'll be able to talk to you better.
Thank you, ma'am. And if you'd be so kind as to look at the evidence that I gave you on your email that shows the overpayment, I would appreciate that. She is also being forced to advocate to the judge And the judge says she's very competent. She asked the judge every time she goes to court, can my friend Lydia Radin be recognized as a friend of the court to help me? And the judge says no. Again, because this is part of a criminal scheme to defraud the taxpayer. But I will let you go, and do you have like 5 or 10 minutes to follow up with me tomorrow?
I am not certain because Mr. Marshall, my deputy, and Mr. Liebert is here.
Okay.
And this area, this case is really under Mr. Marshall's.
Would you like me to, can you ask Mr. Marshall to reach out to me and I'll call him at his convenience?
I certainly will give him this message here. Okay?
Thank you, ma'am. I very much appreciate this.
Thank you for trying to advocate for the client.
And save the taxpayer some money that you could spend more appropriately to really help people who need it.
Okay.
Thank you,
right,
ma'am.
Thank you.